Sir, they gave you $1,800 fine for this backyard jungle.
They said it's my fault, but I can't even hold a tool.
Today, this jungle ends. Your safety matters most.
Yeah.
We're going to clear this path for you, Ronnie, today.
I've been waiting for this for so long.
Yeah, you won't wait anymore. We'll handle this together.
When I pulled up and saw Ronnie standing there with his arm in a blue sling, looking at the jungle of weeds that had trapped his home, I realized that his greatest burden was not the broken bone, but the crushing weight of being unable to care for the only place he had left. As I promised him that we would clear this path and lift the threat of those fines off his shoulders, the look of relief that washed over his face told me he'd been staring into the abyss of losing his home for months. Ronnie stood there on the edge of his property, a man who had clearly spent his life working with his hands, now reduced to watching his own yard being swallowed alive by nature because a single fall had taken away his ability to fight it back. It is a straight-up gut punch to the soul to see a man who has given the best years of his life to this community being treated like a public nuisance by bureaucrats who have never spent a day in their lives struggling to stand on their own 2 feet after an injury. The property was a total disaster zone, overgrown thickets that reached nearly to the roof, thorny vines choking out the light from his home, and enough dead vegetation piled up to turn his entire yard into a tinderbox waiting for a single spark. The city had shown absolutely zero grace to this 85-year-old man, slapping a massive fine on a door he could barely reach through the brush, effectively telling him that his decades of survival were worth zilch the moment he became too frail to hold a tool and maintain his curb appeal. He told me in a voice that was weary and raspy, like gravel shifting underfoot, that he had lived in this house for nearly half a century, and lately, the only thing he had to look forward to was the sound of the city, inspectors' heavy boots coming to deliver another piece of bad news. As I yanked the starter cord on my heavy-duty cutter and the engine roared to life, shattering the stagnant, suffocating silence of the neighborhood, Ronnie tilted his head and let out a long, shaky breath, as if he were listening to a symphony he had not heard in a lifetime. Every aggressive pass of my blade through that gnarly, overgrown thicket felt like I was physically cutting him out of a prison and handing him back the keys to his own dignity that the world had tried to snatch away with legal jargon and cold indifference. The air started to fill with that money smell, the sharp, intoxicatingly sweet scent of crushed clover and wet earth. A sensory roadmap, I prayed, would tell him that the cavalry had finally arrived, and that he was no longer standing alone against the encroaching darkness. I could feel the Karens of the neighborhood peeking through their expensive, pristine blinds. The same folks who had watched the jungle slowly swallow his home for years without ever lifting a finger to help. A man who had clearly lost his ability to keep up. And it gave me a fierce second wind to show them what real deal community and actual brotherhood look like in practice. As the crisp, clean lines of the sidewalk finally surfaced from the dirt, and those heavy layers of Widowmaker debris were cleared from his gutters, the house did not just look better, it looked like it was finally breathing again. Ronnie shuffled cautiously toward the edge of his porch as we wrapped up the job, his eyes scanning a yard that finally looked like a home instead of a forgotten ruin, and he took a deep, shaky hit of the fresh air. He whispered that he had been preparing himself to be forced out, and that seeing his home restored felt like he had been granted a reprieve from a sentence he did not deserve. I realized then that I was not just doing pro bono landscaping. I was holding the line for a man who had been pushed to the edge, making sure he would not be railroaded out of his home by a heartless system just because his physical strength had finally failed him. Before you scroll past this, please drop a comment with the city you are watching from, because elders like Ronnie deserve a salute and a helping hand, not a lawyer's letter and a fine when they are down on their luck. If you saw a man who had worked his whole life now losing the roof over his head, would you have the heart to step up, man the station, and finish the job of being a neighbor? Like and share this to remind the world that we do not leave our elders behind in the weeds. And today, we finally delivered a bit of hope and freedom to Ronnie's doorstep. Ronnie spent his life building his future, so today, we gave him back his peace of mind. Faith in humanity is officially restored.